En 18 th century had tells us that a dozen or so men, women, and children of African heritage were scheduled for buyer's inspection one Saturday, just outside the entrance of the London Coffee House in Philadelphia. The Stamp Act protest and other famous anti-British demonstrations took place not far from the auction block where this enslaved group would have stood chained, their naked bodies ready for prodding and probing. The establishment owner, William Bradford, published, in his newspaper the Pennsylvania Journal, books and other materials, the works of revolutionaries such as Thomas Paine, in addition to the Declaration of Rights from the First Continental Congress. The founding fathers and other influential, wealthy men came to this venue to talk politics, make deals, and often to buy and sell human beings. Tuesday, coffee houses are still meeting place for business dealings and ideological musing. Last month, two young black entrepreneurs visited a Philadelphia Starbucks to meet with a business associate. A store employee called police minute after the men arrived. The video of the arrest went viral. It's not easy to forge the image of these men standing quietly in handcuffs, en eerie resemblance of enslaved men before them. Upon his arrival, their associate, a white man, made futile attempt to speak on their behalf. One of the young men later told a reporter that he feared for his life. This week, Starbucks closed 8,000 of its store for 4 hours to conduct anti-bias training for its employees. Century before a green and white mermaid logo became a synonym for latent-free Wi-Fi, coffee house like the London Coffee House served a de facto organizer of financial markets in poor cities on both sides of the Atlantic. People were lured by caffeine, of course, but moreover by the open exchange of ideas and the chance to mingle in elegant but affordable comfort. The English-style coffee house became really important to the development of capitalism in London from the 17th to 19th century, says Mark Mann-Ellis, author of The Coffee House, A Cultural History. During that period, the legendary London financial infrastructure was still forming. People would go to a particular coffee house in order to meet a particular kind of merchant who specialized in procuring the goods or capital for that industry, says Ellis. For example, William Lloyd's Coffee House in London specialized in being the first in getting marine news, such as arrivals and shipwrecks. Maritime businessmen mess with ship operators to arrange the trading of cargo and invest in future voyages. Merchants and traders profited from the transatlantic slave trade before abolition, not only in the buying and selling of slaves, Ellis says, but also in the whole marine business. Of ship insurance and mortgages to sea captain, this commerce network sparked the creation of Lloyd's of London and helped other businesses across Britain, such as Barclays prosper. In the Cornhill section of London, there were coffee houses that connected people with interest in the particular colony, such as the Virginia Coffee House and the Jamaica Coffee House. Traders, bankers, and Lloyd's merchants also made coffee house in Bristol, England, to enrich themselves with profit from over 2,000 slave ships processed in that city between 1698 and 1807. It's not surprising then that English-style coffee house spread to the British colony very early, says Ellis, although there were fewer of them. There was one in Boston before there was one in Paris, he adds. In the colony, as the coffee house world is emerging, you don't have large-scale commercial banks to the same extent that you have them in the 19th century, says Edward Baptist, scholar and writer of The Alpha Chess Never Been Told, Slavery and the Making of American Capitalism. This scenario means that the movement of capital in many cases individual to individual across mercantile networks that are knit together by relationships and family networks, Baptiste explains. While there was no real aristocracy in the colony to navigate, coffee house became a transition point to connect people, allowing erosion of the traditionalist grip on both politics and the economy of the Atlantic world. From the 16th through the 19th century, the use of enslaved people's bodies, future, and families, the exploitation of their own-ops, was everywhere and constant in the economic system, says Baptiste. Slavery-based commerce, and not just slave ownership, allowed Northerners and other people outside the plantation system to partake in the immense financial profit from slavery. Coffee house, a great place to connect goods and capital streams with seekers, facilitated the very aspect of slavery that amplified capitalism. In this system, enslaved people bodies are not only bought and sold, but made into part of the processes of credit and more rapid flow of finance, Baptiste says. William Bradford opened this London coffee house. There was an earlier one, in Philadelphia in 1754 at the corner of Front and I, now Front and Market, with funding from 200 merchants who wanted a place to assemble. Nearly 40 years later, just some miles away, the New York Stock Exchange was launched by merchants and traders in the Tontin Coffee House at 82 Wall Street. Shipowners registered their vessels with the exchange, and a monetary value was assigned to their freight, including the leaving cargo from Africa. The aspiration of the city's founders was to be the leading slave trading power in the Americas, says historian Leslie Harris. At its height of activity in the triangular trade, New York City lagged only behind Charleston, South Carolina, in number of imported enslaved Africans. When we think about the end of slavery in the North, it is important to note that in New York and Philadelphia, no slaves were freed by abolition laws, says Harris. Rather, formerly enslaved and those born to them continued to be bought and sold and insured, serving for years after legislation was passed. Indentured or freed black could have also worked in the coffee house. After emancipation, however, they were kept out of the job they once performed because they were seen as competition by the white working class. Tuesday, the global coffee chain Starbucks markets itself to a public space. But for whom? Like the drinking houses of prior century, the company to an all-are-welcome policy, but their atmosphere, as well as the price and type of drink on the menu, and discrimination by some employees, may imply otherwise. The modern coffee shop, for many, represents a more conducive working space than the cubicle system. but in the likeness of its predecessor, it doesn't seem to be intended for all of us to experience it in the same way. Capitalism restant the work, endeavor, and exploitation of non-white people, says Baptiste. And so does some of the assumptions about who's to participate in what level of the economy, who's to make decisions, and who's to move in those kinds of innovative spaces. I continue, those ideas seem in some cases to be very deeply cemented into manifold understanding of who capitalism is for. According to Baptiste, the emergence of public spaces such as English-style coffee houses in a democratizing process. The establishment, despite their role in the commerce of slavery, provided people across social class, originally white men, but later people of color and women, with place to launch a revolution. In addition to American colonists, some abolitionists organizing in 1790s London, such as Oloda and Cano, valued the openness of the coffee house to all kinds of people, and chose to use these spaces instead of private or more religious edifices, says Ellis. 21st century Philadelphia has black-owned coffee house, in the tradition of those abolitionists, running a radical movement of their own. Ariel Johnson, owner of Amalgam Comic. Now one of the most popular comic book establishments in the country, Amalgam has become an alternative to the traditional, white, heteronormative spaces, she says. While companies like Starbucks step up to address historical social ills, there are other emerging spaces that welcome everyone. Johnson says, "We support and highlight the voices of people of color and LGBTQ, as well as professional and business development opportunities." Tasha Williams wrote this article for Yes Magazine.